Welcome to the INFOWARS Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's Monday, November 17th, 2014. Here are our top stories.
Tonight, a state of emergency has been declared in Missouri as the grand jury in Ferguson is set to release their decision surrounding the death of Michael Brown. The National Guard has been deployed, and once again, INFOWARS has boots on the ground. Then, a school in Connecticut is now teaching children that the government gives us rights. And Microsoft hires RoboCops to guard their Silicon Valley headquarters. All that plus much more up next on the INFOWARS Nightly News.
Well, the AP News has an interesting observation about the results of the election about 2 weeks ago. Although the GOP may not be holding Obama's feet to the fire on his movement for executive amnesty for illegal aliens, it looks like those in his party may be ready to do that based on what happened in Oregon. They report that Oregon immigration vote is a warning for Obama. They say even as Oregon voters were legalizing things like recreational marijuana, expanding Democrat majorities in state government, they decided by a margin of 66 to 34 to cancel a new state law that would have provided driver's licenses to people who are in the U.S. illegally. And one of the persons who supported that measure say the political cost may be significant even in the blue states. They say opponents barely gathered enough signatures to put the repeal question on the ballot. Immigrant rights groups outspent their opponents 10-1. And still lost. Now, they go on to say in the article that polls often show that the support for amnesty is broad-based in the public, but in many cases, they believe this is because of the tricks inherent in the polling industry in terms of complex questions, that sort of thing. They say when it's put up to a straight up and down vote, it's very clear. This person said it really highlights how this issue is not a Republican liberal issue, like, say, for example, taxes and abortion, but it's an up-down issue of the elites versus the public. That's right, and those elites are not just Obama, but it's also the GOP and their allies in big business and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce who want to see low-wage jobs come into the United States, essentially putting them against blue-collar workers, and Obama is very aware of this as well. The Daily Caller went back and looked at the book that he did in 2006, The Audacity of Hope, and had him reading excerpts from it, of course, in his audio book, talking about the impact that was going to be on blue-collar workers and on blacks and on Americans in general. Here's what he had to say back in 2006. He said, "There's no denying that blacks share the same anxieties as whites about the wave of illegal immigration." Of course, he's not talking about undocumented immigration. He's talking about illegal immigration when he ran in 2006. He said, "It's flooding our southern border, a sense that what's happening now is fundamentally different than what has gone on before." Exactly, including all the previous amnesties that they're now trying to draw parallels to during the time of Reagan. Yes, Reagan did participate in an amnesty. Look at the results. We were promised that there was going to then be control of the border if they just allowed the people that were already here to become citizens. That didn't happen. We've been fooled before by that. And since when do the Democrats go to Ronald Reagan for authority for anything that they do? And of course, Ronald Reagan many times did things that I don't believe were legitimate or constitutional. Look at what he did to the deficit. Look at the gun control initiatives that he put in, the war on drugs, mandatory minimums, on and on and on, the Iran-Contra affair, crack cocaine, you name it. But Obama goes back on and says that illegal immigration threatens to depress further the wages of blue-collar Americans and put strains on an already overburdened safety net. Yes, in other words, imploding the welfare state, Cloward and Piven. In the passage, he also reveals that he personally feels patriotic resentment when he sees Mexican flags at immigration rallies. And he says native-born Americans suspect that it is they and not the immigrants who are being forced to adapt. Exactly. Obama has said he wants to fundamentally transform this country. And just like the villain played by Robert Redford in the newest Captain America movie, he wants to fundamentally destroy this country before he rebuilds something that is fundamentally different. Now, the Republicans, of course, are not doing anything to stop him, and they claim that they can't do anything because it's not going to get any farther than an impeachment in the House. It's not going to go to the Senate, and they won't be able to do anything about it. But look at what they're doing on something that is interesting to them, something that they do have an interest in, and that's the Keystone Pipeline. Though the first week that they came back, the very first thing they did was to bring the Keystone Pipeline up again for the 9th time that they have passed it. 9 times it makes. Now, the person who brought this up, a person who's running in a runoff for senator in Louisiana, is the one who introduced it. He said, here we are on our 9th attempt. It has been 539 days, about a year and a half since the House first sent a Keystone approval bill to the Senate and the Congress. We're going to make it as easy as possible for the Senate to finally get a bill to the president's desks. So if it has to do with something that their corporate masters, the Koch brothers, other industry interests have, they will do it for them, but they won't do what is in the interest of the American people, and that is stand up to the illegal actions of Obama. There's been more than 9 occasions that he should have been impeached for various actions that he's done. Yet they stand by and say, there's no use doing it because we can't get it through the Senate and do anything farther than that. Yet they can't get the Keystone Pipeline any farther through the Senate. They still have done it 9 times. And they point out in the New American that the economics of the Keystone Pipeline are even questionable benefit for those who support it. They already have 3 legs of a pipeline that are bringing crude oil from North Dakota to refineries on the Gulf Coast. Now, those are bringing in about 9 million barrels per day, 9 billion barrels per day from those 3 legs, on an average 3 million barrels per day. This 4th leg that they're fighting so hard to get in would only add 0.8 billion barrels a day. It would cost $10 billion. It would take 3 years to build. And as they point out, it's not necessarily an economic alternative to things like railroad shipping in terms of being able to take it to different destinations at different times rather than always having it pumped to one location. Yet 9 times it will come up because that's what their corporate masters want. They don't care what's in your interest. They don't care what the people want. Again, it is the interests of the elite versus the interests of the public, just exactly as we see on the immigration issue. Now, also in another area, of course, in the war on coal, the White House sent a message today saying they don't think that the GOP can stop them or will be able to stop them as they continue to shut down power plants in the United States. The White House on Monday essentially dared Republicans to try and stop Obama's climate change agenda, with officials bragging that even after the GOP takes control of the Senate in January, there's nothing that they can do to stop a host of controversial new actions. John Podesta, the White House counselor, said, I believe the president will complete actions. It is a top priority of his, and I don't believe they can stop us. And then, of course, they go on to say that last week, Obama reached an agreement with the Chinese, a new climate deal. Well, here's the climate deal. China gets the new jobs. China gets the new power facilities. We get our jobs exported. We get high cost of living because they are taking down our economical power plants. And of course, we get the global pollution and the global warming because it's a global situation. If we're worried about global warming and global pollution, then why is it okay for China to build power plants, but we have to shut them down in America? And look at the extent of the dichotomy between us and China. By 2025, just 11 years, we are going to have to reduce our energy use by 26%. China, on the other hand, will be allowed to grow as rapidly and as extensively and without any kind of controls or caps on their carbon generation for 16 years to 2030. Before, they are not reduced, but then they are leveled at whatever they're producing in 2030. That's the New Deal. That's the New Deal that Obama offers us. And you have to ask yourself, is he working in America's interest or is he working in China's interest? Well, of course, he's working in China's interest because that is what the global elite, the corporations that are running this government, want. They want to transfer jobs, export them to cheaper countries where they don't have any pollution control. And the remaining jobs that are being done in this country, they want being done by people at much, much lower wage levels. Now, the New American asks, looking again at the election last 2 weeks ago, they ask, why have people not noticed one of the most important ballot issues that passed? And that, of course, is a victory about states' rights, states' nullification. This was pointed out by a writer at Ron Paul's Voices of Liberty. He said, most have heard the continued success of states legalizing marijuana, with Oregon and Alaska following the lead of Colorado and Washington, but an even bigger event took place in Arizona with Proposition 122, called the Arizona Rejection of Unconstitutional Federal Actions Amendment. It passed, and it codified in the state constitution the legal doctrine called anti-commandeering. In other words, the right of a state not to be forced by the feds to fund programs that are foisted upon it. They say the program, Proposition 122, permits the state to exercise its sovereign authority by restricting state and local personnel and financial resources to the purposes that are consistent with the Constitution of the United States. That's a very important thing. Look at the approach that the 10th Amendment Center and others have taken to try to shut down the unconstitutional actions of the NSA by essentially saying, we are not going to fund the subsidies for your data collection center out here in Utah, the water, the power that you are commandeering here. We're not going to allow you to do that. We're also not going to allow your officers to use state and local officers to accomplish unconstitutional actions. It is part of the division of power that was very, very important. The founders understood that we did not want to have all power concentrated into one area, which is what we have now. The way we break the control, the black hole of power and money in Washington, is to reconstruct the Constitution, reenact the Constitution, make it effective by distributing the power away from the center and having people with the guts to stand up at the state and local level against these unconstitutional actions. Now, Scalia had an interesting comment in one of his Supreme Court cases that they point out here, and this bears on our next story here. He says, when the federal government assumes powers not explicitly granted to it in the Constitution, it puts the states on a road towards obliteration, and it puts citizens on the road to enslavement. That's right. If you don't understand that the states have power against the central government and that citizens have power and rights against both the state and the federal government, you are on the road to slavery. But that's exactly not what is being taught in the government schools. Look at this article from INFOWARS today. School teaches kids that the government gives us rights. Paul Joseph Watson writes, a handout given to second grade children at a school in Fairfield, Connecticut states that, quote, the government gives us rights. He says it's a disturbing example of how kids are being miseducated about their constitutional freedoms in America. But this sentence here says it all, I think. In the handout that says, rights are special privileges the government gives you. In other words, putting this meme out that the government is giving us rights and that they are somehow privileges. They're conflating and confusing in the minds of children the differences between rights and privileges. Rights are things that we hold inherently as human beings. That was the foundation of our country, the foundation of our government, in the Declaration of Independence, that we have inalienable rights that are God-given, that we create government in order to protect those rights. A privilege is just something that you don't have that somebody gives you. It's not something that you inherently have. They have turned everything into a privilege. They're denying all of our rights, and now they're teaching the second graders that the only thing that they have is a privilege, that rights are privileges that are granted by the government. Now let's take a look at an individual who likes to criticize the government, and he uses hip-hop to do it. Rob Dew has that report.
Thanks, David. Last week, we published an article called Music Video Keep the Club Swingin' featuring Obama, and it went to a YouTube remix that a director in Southern California produced. His name's Deron Lyons. And basically, he took a Dr. Dre song and then ad-libbed a bunch of Obama rapping. And it's really an amazing piece if you haven't seen it. We're going to go to a clip here in a second. But it really does speak to the message of, here we have a president who's supposed to be in tune with what's going on in America, and he's out playing golf. We saw the same thing with George Bush. In fact, there's a quote of George Bush where he goes, talking about a building exploding, he goes, now watch me hit this drive, and just knocks one out like that after talking about killing people. Really amazing what goes on here in our country, how we're using this high-tech police state warfare industrial complex system to kill people from afar, while our presidents and world leaders can just sit back and play golf. So we're going to go to that clip right now, and then we're going to have the director, Deron Lyons, on to talk about it.
Say what? You better get up out of your chair. That's right. And work your body down. No time to fuck around, 'cause we gon'
Roll you right on up. So get up. Let me hear you. Shout and get your drivers out.